The sun was just beginning to warm the tarmac when Sergeant Major Dave Lawson, a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran, approached the airline gate with his boarding pass and military ID in hand. He wore a crisp jacket decorated with a single row of medals, and he leaned slightly on a polished wooden cane, not for show, but for balance. Dave wasn't asking for favors. All he wanted was to pre-board, as was customary for passengers needing extra time or mobility support. But the young gate agent, a woman named Carla, no older than 25, glanced at his ID with indifference and scoffed. "Sir, that's not a valid reason for early boarding," she said flatly. "Anyone can wear a jacket like that." Dave's face stiffened. Years of military discipline held his voice steady. "Ma'am, this jacket was earned. I'm not asking for special treatment, just a chance to get to my seat without being jostled." Carla rolled her eyes and turned to the next passenger in line. "Unless you are in a wheelchair or have a doctor's note, you'll need to wait like everyone else." The line behind him shifted awkwardly. Some passengers averted their eyes. Others glanced between Dave's cane and his combat ribbons with unease, but no one spoke up. Dave stepped aside, silently, humiliated. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply sat down nearby, gripping his cane tighter and staring at the carpeted floor, trying to swallow the sting of being dismissed, not for who he was, but for how little that now seemed to matter. The pain wasn't just physical. It was the ache of being forgotten, of realizing that to some, a lifetime of sacrifice could be waved off with a shrug. And yet, in that moment, Dave had no idea that someone had taken notice, and the next few minutes would change everything. As Sergeant Major Dave Lawson sat in the waiting area, the hurt from being dismissed at the gate was still raw. He shifted slightly to ease the pressure on his aching knee and looked over at his granddaughter, Emily, who had been watching the scene unfold from a few feet away. She was only 9, with wide, curious eyes and a heart that had always admired her grandfather's service. Today was supposed to be special, their first trip together to Washington, D.C., where he'd planned to show her the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and tell stories he rarely shared. But the air had shifted. Emily approached slowly, sensing something was wrong. "Grandpa," she asked gently, "why didn't that lady let you on the plane early like the others with canes?" Dave looked at her, his throat tightening. He couldn't bring himself to explain bureaucracy or ignorance. Not yet. Instead, he patted the seat beside him and motioned for her to sit. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "people forget what others have gone through. They don't always mean to be unkind, but they don't take the time to understand. It's okay, sweetie, we're still going." Emily was quiet for a moment, then reached into her small pink backpack and pulled out the drawing she'd made, a stick figure version of her grandpa standing proud with the word hero written in bold marker above it. "You're on my list," she said defiantly, holding it up. "You don't need hers." That simple act hit Dave harder than any insult could. He smiled, blinking fast. "That means more than any list I've ever been on." As other passengers passed by, some casting quick glances in their direction, Dave remained still. He could have raised his voice, could have demanded the respect he'd earned. But that wasn't his way. His dignity wasn't built on shouting or confrontation. It was forged in decades of quiet service and sacrifice. Still beneath the calm exterior, something inside him stirred. Not anger, but a quiet resolve, the kind that had guided him through jungle ambushes and sleepless nights spent comforting younger soldiers far from home. He wasn't looking for recognition, but he wasn't going to let the moment pass without reflection either. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. There was someone he could call, a former comrade, turned liaison for a national veterans organization, just to share the incident, not to stir trouble, but to ensure it didn't happen again to someone without a voice. As he sent a short message, he looked at Emily and smiled. "Let's see if we can find a donut before boarding," he said. "You still excited for the trip?" She nodded quickly, slipping her hand into his as they stood, always. Dave's limp was more pronounced that morning, but so was his purpose. He wasn't just walking for himself now, he was walking for every veteran who'd ever been told they didn't count, and he wasn't done being heard. Just as Sergeant Major Dave Lawson sat down beside his granddaughter Emily, trying to refocus their day after the humiliating rejection, the airport intercom system crackled to life. What followed was anything but routine. The calm, authoritative voice that poured from the speakers was instantly recognizable to every local listener. It belonged to Governor Elaine Monroe. The terminal buzz paused mid-motion. Travelers froze. Conversations died down. Even the gate agents stopped typing. "This is Governor Monroe," the voice declared firmly. "It has come to my immediate attention that a decorated veteran was denied respectful accommodations at this very gate. That veteran is Sergeant Major David Lawson, United States Army, retired. He has served our nation through 2 tours in Vietnam and over 3 decades of selfless military service." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dave, stunned, glanced up in disbelief. Emily squeezed his hand tightly, her eyes wide with a mix of pride and awe. "I want to be perfectly clear," the governor continued, "that this administration holds zero tolerance for the public mistreatment of veterans, not in our streets, not in our institutions, and certainly not in our airports." Just moments before, Dave had quietly texted an old friend, Colonel Rick Morrison, now Chief of Staff to the governor. The message had been brief, just a few lines describing the incident and the gate agent's refusal to honor his disability access. Dave never expected it to travel beyond Rick. But Rick knew the governor's values, and he had immediately forwarded the message, knowing that her stance on veteran dignity wasn't just political, it was personal. Her late father had been a Marine. The result was now playing out over the PA system for the entire terminal to hear. As of this moment, the governor's voice continued, "I have instructed the Department of Transportation and the Office of Veterans Affairs to conduct a full audit of this airport's accessibility and training protocols. Furthermore, the employee responsible for this failure has been placed on immediate administrative review." The gate agent who had dismissed Dave, a young man named Trent, stood frozen at his post, pale and visibly shaking. His supervisor, who had remained in the background, now rushed forward with her phone in hand, already on a call with airport leadership. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Dave, overwhelmed, didn't know whether to stand or remain seated. Before he could decide, a tall man in a dark suit approached the governor's senior aide, Sergeant Major Lawson. "Governor Monroe sends her sincere apologies," he said respectfully. "She's on her way here now and has instructed us to escort you and your granddaughter to the executive lounge. You'll board early as honored guests." As they were guided through the crowd, people began clapping a slow, steady rhythm that built into heartfelt applause. Strangers approached to shake Dave's hand. Some placed theirs over their hearts. Emily beamed, walking proudly beside her grandfather, as if she finally understood why the world should know what she had always believed her grandpa was a hero. What had started as a painful morning had transformed into a moment of public truth. A quiet man had been recognized, not because he demanded it, but because someone in power had listened, acted, and made sure the world saw the respect that should have been there all along. The applause still echoed in Sergeant Major Dave Lawson's ears as he and his granddaughter Emily were escorted to the executive lounge. But the public recognition wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of real accountability. Within the hour, a whirlwind of action unfolded inside the airport. Governor Elaine Monroe's unexpected broadcast had sent shockwaves through the facility, and now the people responsible were scrambling to respond. Trent, the young gate agent, whose dismissive behavior triggered the incident, was immediately pulled from his post. His supervisor, Ms. Dorsey, now pale and visibly shaken, led him into a nearby conference room where representatives from the airport's executive staff were waiting. The Department of Veterans Affairs and the Governor's Office of Civil Compliance had already dispatched investigators. Within minutes, personnel files were being reviewed, training protocols were pulled, and footage from the gate's security cameras was requested. Governor Monroe arrived shortly after entering the airport, not as a politician, but as a determined advocate for veterans. Her presence carried the weight of the office she held and the personal conviction of a daughter who had once watched her own father endure silent disrespect after his military service. She bypassed the media frenzy gathering outside and headed straight to the operations center where she met with airport leadership. "We failed today," she said plainly, standing at the head of a long boardroom table. "But what matters now is how we correct it, not just for Sergeant Major Lawson, but for every veteran and disabled passenger who walks through these doors." Governor Monroe's tone was resolute. She ordered a full review of the airport's veteran access policies, mandating that all federally issued VA disability IDs be accepted without question. She also demanded that all airport employees undergo mandatory training on veteran and disability awareness, led in partnership with the state's Office of Veterans Advocacy. The first session was scheduled within 48 hours. Back in the executive lounge, Dave sat quietly sipping a cup of tea. He hadn't asked for any of this. All he'd wanted was to board quietly with dignity and enjoy the trip with his granddaughter. Emily sat beside him, her small hand wrapped around his, still smiling. "You didn't yell," she said softly. "You just stood tall." "That's what we do," Dave replied. "Not just soldiers, anyone with pride and patience." A few minutes later, a knock came at the lounge door. Governor Monroe stepped in, flanked by her aide and the airport's director of operations. She approached Dave, offering a handshake that turned into a warm, two-handed grasp. "Sergeant Major Lawson." She said, "I'm deeply sorry for what happened to you today. This should never have occurred, but I promise you it won't happen again, not here and not on my watch." Dave nodded, emotion caught in his throat. "Thank you, Governor, for seeing us, for stepping in." As a final gesture, the airport offered Dave and Emily complimentary first-class upgrades and lifetime access to expedited services, but Dave politely declined anything that felt like special treatment. "Just do better," he said. "That's all I ask." And they did. In the weeks that followed, the airport launched a new Honor Access program. Posters featuring veterans like Dave lined the terminals, reminding staff and travelers alike that true service deserves respect. Governor Monroe highlighted the story in a statewide address, urging other public facilities to adopt similar reforms. Dave's quiet resolve had not only changed one moment, it had reshaped the system. In the end, the story wasn't about punishment. It was about awakening. It was about teaching institutions to recognize dignity not by rank or paperwork, but by the sacrifices etched into a veteran's quiet grace. As the sun dipped lower over Coaster Kingdom, Sergeant Major Dave Lawson and his granddaughter Emily finally boarded the very ride she had dreamed about all year. But this time, it wasn't through a side entrance. It wasn't with hushed apologies or reluctant glances. It was with full honors. As they passed the ride gates, staff members stood at attention. Families who had witnessed the earlier injustice now clapped, many placing hands over their hearts. Dave, humbled but steady, held Emily's hand as they rode the roller coaster together, her laughter soaring over the tracks like music. For a man who had once faced battlefield fire, the joy in his granddaughter's eyes was the greatest victory of all. This wasn't just a ride, it was a restoration of dignity. A moment that reminded everyone watching that standing up for what's right, even quietly, can shake the ground beneath a broken system. Respect isn't about paperwork or protocols. It's about recognizing the humanity, the history, and the heart behind each face we meet. Dave didn't ask to be treated like a hero, he just wanted to be treated fairly, and that simple truth made all the difference. If this story moved you, if you believe our veterans deserve more than just thanks, but real action and respect, please leave a comment with the word honor below and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the values we should never forget.